Allô, Nissan? Hey, grosse tempête, hein?
Hey, Karine, oui, je sais, les vilains bonhommes de neige sont de retour.
Mais avec le Nissan Rogue à traction intégrale, c'est pas stressant.
Exact, il est conçu et testé pour nos hivers. Oh, Karine, il y a un bonhomme dans le Rogue.
Ah, c'est correct. J'ai allumé les sièges chauffants.
Ah, bien joué, Karine. Maîtrisez toutes les conditions. Louez le Rogue S 2026 à partir de 0,4% jusqu'à 36 mois, incluant une réduction fidélité de 0,5% pour les clients Nissan admissibles. Jusqu'au 2 mars, sur approbation de crédit, les conditions s'appliquent. Détails chez Nissan.
Tom, a lot of news. I'm not sure where to start. Might as well start with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on Donald Trump today, telling him that his emergency tariffs are no longer valid, and then the tirade he went on reacting to it.
Well, the tirade part was entirely predictable, and it's the art of a spectacular, experienced con man. It was amazing to watch him perform this afternoon after he got his rear end handed to him by the Supreme Court of the United States. It was as if nothing had happened. He was right. Every single president of the United States before him, including Ronald Reagan, who explained that tariffs are just a tax on consumers, they were all wrong. They didn't do their jobs. He's the best. He's the big, beautiful president, and he's going to make sure that he keeps tariffs going. It was entirely predictable that he would just move on to the next escape clause, which is how he's done business, how he's run his life. And at one point in his press conference, Aaron, it was worth noting that he said, oh, well, we'll just do this, and then it'll be litigated for the next 2 years. So in other words, even if I do this and it's completely illegal, then it really doesn't matter. And then he had the temerity to say, oh, by the way, in this whole decision, they didn't say whether or not I had to give back the tariffs.
Yeah.
What a terrible decision that is. So it's pure Donald Trump, up and down, extraordinary to watch in full rhetorical flight. He knew he had just gotten thumped, but he was going to explain how he had actually just won. It was amazing to behold.
You know, I'm going to have someone on from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce because they've already reacted to this. And I read the opening paragraph, Tom, and, everyone's trying to understand what this will mean, right, going forward. He talked about a 10% general tariff he's now going to apply. But this says Canada should prepare for new, blunter mechanisms to be used to reassert trade pressure, potentially with broader and more disruptive effects. And I'm reading this because I thought, originally this must be a win, but they're making it seem like, no, this is not a win. In fact, expect even worse.
Yeah, because you're dealing with the great disruptor. That's what Donald Trump is. He's like a child who breaks his toys when he doesn't get what he wants. The whole purpose of these tariffs was to pour money into the U.S. Treasury. But what Donald Trump never mentioned is that it's not the government of Canada. It's not even Canadian companies paying these tariffs. It's American consumers. That, by the way, was the key message from Ronald Reagan in that now famous video clip that was played by Doug Ford on American television during the World Series of baseball. That was the whole point. They're bad for American consumers. So the cost of a sedan in the United States between Donald Trump's arrival in office and today, which is just over a year, has gone up thousands of dollars. American cars have gone way up. Why? Well, because they cost that much more to make. You put tariffs on aluminum and steel coming in from Canada, and Americans don't make nearly enough aluminum. You still have to buy it. It's the American consumer paying that outrageous tariff. So some of those have been removed. One of the best bits of information that I think that people should take away from this, because Trump is going to start his usual bluster and his threatening about not renewing the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal. This just in. That trade deal stipulates that if they don't renew it this summer, it ends, that version, but it continues in force for 10 years because nobody's crazy enough to say, oh, well, this trade deal can just end overnight. That's what Donald Trump doesn't understand about world trade. That's what he doesn't understand about so many things, is that there are subtleties involved, there are rules involved, there are reasons things evolve. To hear Donald Trump tell it, everybody's just rushing back to the United States to build more cars. Perhaps, but they're going to build cars, a sedan, a full-sized automobile will cost $10,000 more than it did just a couple of years ago.
By the way, to your point, I know there were industry numbers out this week. This is amazing. To you just brought up that idea of the car in the U.S. The average price of a car now in the U.S. is $48,000 to $50,000 American dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of crazy. I mean, when you consider that 5 years ago, I think it was roughly half that.
Yeah, and a sedan, what I'm referring to, your typical full-sized car, that's gone up to $55,000.
Wow. All right, look, let me go closer to home. Danielle Smith coming out today. I want you to hear this.
Sorry, Aaron, by the way, just so people listening understand, that's 55,000 real dollars, US dollars.
American dollars, the real kind. This is Alberta Premier Danielle Smith.
I want you to know how confident I am in the judgment of Albertans on these and other delicate issues. Although there are some politicians and commentators that fear direct democracy, such as referendums, I do not. I trust the judgment of Albertans.
So that's part of a longer speech because Albertans, according to Danielle Smith, will be going to vote in a referendum in October. Tom, do we equate this with Alberta trying to get pretty much the same deal that Quebec has within Canada? What do you think is going on here?
It's that scene from Fantasia when the sorcerer's apprentice lets all hell break loose because they just think that they can don the robes and pick up the magic wand. Danielle Smith is easy to underestimate because despite her best efforts to appear otherwise, she's not a dummy. But what she just said there is so breathtakingly misguided. It's unbelievable that she would use the tool of a referendum on constitutional issues to go after immigrants, to go after the rule of law, to go after the existing constitutional order, namely the fact that equalization is part of what we do in Canada. We have it in the Constitution that we're going to work it out, that the richer provinces are going to get a little bit less, they're going to have to pay in a little bit more so that the provinces that are not doing so well can get something and keep essentially close to the same basket of social and other services. She's blaming immigrants. She's attacking them, as far as I'm concerned. It's a dirty, rotten game that we know far too well here in Quebec because it's being played over and over again by the Parti Québécois, which is trying to get back its gold medal position from the CAQ, which has been doing a great job. Looks like the CAQ will be backing away from that quite a bit with Christine Fréchette, who will come in as premier and as their candidate and leader in the next election. Let's see how that works out for the CAQ. I think it's actually going to work out for them quite well. But as far as Danielle Smith is concerned, it's reprehensible, the game that she's playing. And by the way, it's not illegal. The Supreme Court has even said that if a province gets sufficient support, a clear majority to a clear question in a fair process, asking for constitutional change, it's not clear whether or not this constitutes an ask for constitutional change, then there has to be negotiations in good faith with the other partners in Confederation. That's the part that she doesn't understand. That's where she's the sorcerer apprentice, unleashing forces she sincerely does not even comprehend.
But Tom, for people hearing this, for our listeners, I should point out, this is not about Alberta separating like a Quebec referendum would be. This is Alberta asking for its own powers, the kind that Quebec already has over immigration, et cetera. Am I correct?
Well, no. I mean, that's the argument that you read from some columnists, especially. There's one guy who writes on this constantly in the National Post, and his theme is, here's all the cool stuff that Quebec gets that Alberta or other provinces don't. And it's just full of mistakes. So yes, Quebec has over the years negotiated that, and this goes back 50 years. Quebec has, or pretty darn close to 50 years. Quebec has negotiated a better position in terms of selection of immigrants, and that has to do with the fact that it's the only French-speaking province or French-majority province. So that's fair enough. But it doesn't mean that that Alberta is missing out on something. What she's trying to say is she wants rules that if you move to Alberta to work, but you're from another province, you can be held back for your health and social services. This is the type of thing that she's musing about. And yes, it doesn't satisfy those who actually want separation for Alberta, which is actually a group that exists. They're asking people to sign on for a referendum on separation, but they need a lot of signatures, and it looks like they're having trouble getting them. So what she's doing is she's trying to take the bull by the horns and use this to her own political advantage and outrun, for want of a better expression, outrun the opposition, which in Alberta is the NDP under outgoing Calgary Mayor Ned Nenshi.
Right. All right. Well, let me go to one last story here today. I had Soraya Martinez-Ferretta on the show. Today marks 100 days in office. Give me your assessment of what you've seen so far.
I think she's a great mayor, and she deserves high marks for what she's been able to do in the first few months. No, she hasn't been able to get everything done. She had a list of 10 priorities, and she's doing a pretty good job of tackling them. One of the things that she put high on her priority list was dealing with homelessness, Aaron. And I've been listening to her various interviews during the day in French and in English, and boy, is she fluently bilingual. And I think that compared to what we had with Valerie Plante, she understands everything. Now, whereas Plante was very one-sided in her approach, and the housing crisis and the crisis of people who don't have a house, the homelessness crisis, got worse under Valerie Plante. So we had a lot of rhetoric, but we didn't have a lot of solutions. I think that Soraya is on the right track. I think she's doing a great job. And I think that Montrealers are going to see a qualitative and quantitative difference in this administration. The downtown core was hollowed out under Valerie Plante and her administration. Office towers were emptying out. There is no real economic sector left in Montreal compared to, say, Toronto. And all you have to do is work a little bit, as I do in Toronto, to know that. So is there going to be a chance for the tourism sector to come back, for the economic sector to become once and more attractive? I mean, the policies of François Legault were hurting Montreal, and hurting Montreal hurts the province. And that's why we're doing so badly.
All right, Tom, I'm going to leave it at that. Can I just get you to say, and I understand this is kind of thing that everyone missed last night, the NDP had their, what did they have last night, a debate? Well,
they had their last leadership debate.
How'd that go?
Well, I think it's pretty clear just from the fundraising numbers that a fellow named Avi Lewis, who's got a strong family background with the NDP and whose wife, Naomi Klein, is a brand ambassador for the left around the world. He's heading for victory. Now, I actually watched it long enough to hear him say something that I read that he was saying, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't making it up. And he did say that he wants the government to have a grocery store that he would run. And I guess he wants that because the government does such a good job of doing everything else that it runs.
Wait, you're talking about nationalizing grocery stores?
Well, at least having one that was run by the government so that there would be competition. So one wag that I work with came up with the best. Has this guy ever heard of Canada Post? And so the two of us together decided that the best solution would be to say that they'll get Canada Post to deliver your groceries.
Oh, perfect.
And that would be,
there you go.
That come from the government store, of course. Yeah. That would be a great solution. It's unbelievable. Look, it's going to be very, very, very disconnected from the average voting Canadian. Jack Layton and I did everything we could to build up the party, including build it up in Quebec. And we built it up well in Quebec. We had the Orange Wave in 2011, 59 seats. 2015, Aaron, when we lost to Trudeau, we still had 15 seats for the NDP in the province of Quebec. The last man standing is Alexandre Boulris, and he will be announcing this weekend that he's going to be leaving the NDP to run with Quebec Solidaire, and they will have precisely 0 members of parliament left. And I think that that's what you get when you go down this type of direction.
Tom Mulcair, Tom, we leave it at that. You have yourself a great weekend, and thanks so much.
You too. Great weekend, Aaron.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years.
And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.